The late afternoon sun of Mizurufu beat down on the neighborhood playground, casting long, distorted shadows across the sandbox and the jungle gym. The air was thick with the oppressive humidity of Japanese summer, vibrating with the shrill, unending cries of cicadas. But beneath the canopy of the oak trees, another sound was drowning them out. "Come on, Katsuki! Show him what happens when a pebble gets in our way." A young boy, barely 4 years old, was backed against the trunk of a sprawling tree, tears streaming down his dirt-smudged face. He clutched his scraped knees, trembling as 3 other boys loomed over him. At the center of the trio stood Katsuki Bakugo, his spiky ash-blonde hair catching the sunlight like a crown of fire. Even at 4, Katsuki carried himself with the absolute, unquestionable certainty of a king, and why shouldn't he? He was blessed. Chosen. Small, sharp cracks echoed in the muggy air. Pop, pop, sizzle. The smell of burnt sugar and ozone drifted from Katsuki's small palms as miniature explosions danced across his skin. His quirk had manifested only a few weeks prior, but it was already magnificent. It was a hero's quirk. A quirk meant for the top. "You're in my spot," Katsuki sneered, his ruby-red eyes narrowed with childish cruelty. He raised a hand, the sparks growing brighter, hotter. "And nobody ignores me when I tell them to move. Got it extra?" The crying boy squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the burning impact. "Kaken, stop!" The voice was small, wavering, and pitched tight with terror. Katsuki paused, his sparks fizzling out momentarily as he looked over his shoulder. Standing a few feet away was Izuku Midoriya. Izuku was a small, fragile-looking child with a mop of unruly green hair and large, emerald eyes that were currently swimming with unshed tears. His knees were knocking together so violently they audibly clicked. His fists were balled up at his sides, his knuckles stark white. He looked utterly terrified, yet he had planted himself firmly between Katsuki and the crying boy. "Izuku?" Katsuki scoffed, a mocking grin spreading across his face. "What do you think you're doing? You don't even have a quirk yet. You're just... Deku. Why, you're making him cry, Kaken," Izuku stammered, raising his arms in a weak, defensive posture. It was a pathetic stance, utterly devoid of martial skill, driven purely by an instinctive need to protect. "If you keep hurting people, I'll stop you myself." Katsuki's grin vanished, replaced by a scowl of pure indignation. How dare this quirkless nobody stand up to him? How dare a pebble try to halt a landslide? "You'll stop me?" Katsuki's voice dropped, the childish pitch replaced by something surprisingly venomous. He lunged forward, his right hand pulled back. The sweet scent of caramel intensified. "Don't play hero with me, Deku!" Katsuki thrust his palm forward. A larger explosion, louder and brighter than any he had produced before, erupted from his hand, aimed squarely at Izuku's face. The shockwave kicked up a cloud of dust and sand. Izuku didn't close his eyes. In that microsecond, time seemed to dilate. He saw the flash of orange and yellow fire blooming toward him. He felt the wave of intense heat washing over his skin. But beneath the terror, something else stirred deep within his chest. It wasn't a muscle. It wasn't an organ. It felt like a dormant engine, buried at the very core of his being, suddenly roaring to life. It was a feeling of agonizing emptiness, followed immediately by an overwhelming influx of pressure. Izuku's mind was flooded. For a fraction of a second, the playground vanished. He didn't see trees or sand or Katsuki. He saw structure. He saw the atomic makeup of the air, the density of the earth, the geometric bonds of matter. It was a terrifying, incomprehensible torrent of information slamming into a 4-year-old brain. His body grew instantly cold, as if his very life force, his physical stamina, and the kinetic energy of the approaching explosion were being siphoned away into his hands. "Protect," his mind screamed. Hard. Solid. Unbreakable. A blinding, ethereal blue light erupted from Izuku's outstretched palms. It was so intense that Katsuki had to squeeze his eyes shut, his explosion swallowed completely by the incandescent flash. Clang. The sound was deafening. It didn't sound like a child's quirk. It sounded like a massive church bell being struck by a sledgehammer. The kinetic force of Katsuki's explosion rebounded, sending the blond boy tumbling backward onto his rear in the sand, his ears ringing. When the dust cleared and the blue light faded, the playground fell utterly silent. Even the cicadas seemed to have stopped. Katsuki stared, his jaw slack. The two cronies behind him took a terrified step back. Floating perfectly in the air, clutched in Izuku's small, trembling hands, was a shield. It was a kite shield, roughly 3 feet tall, perfectly proportioned to protect the boy's body. But it wasn't a toy. It wasn't made of plastic or wood. It was forged from flawless, polished titanium. Intricate, geometric grooves were etched into its surface, gleaming in the late afternoon sun. It was impossibly smooth, completely unaffected by the blast of fire that had just struck it. Izuku stood behind it, panting heavily. His green eyes were wide, staring at the back of the heavy metal object he was somehow holding. It felt warm to the touch, yet solid and undeniably real. Deku. Katsuki whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of shock and a sudden, alien feeling, fear. What did you do? Izuku opened his mouth to answer, but no words came out. Instead, a thick droplet of crimson blood rolled from his left nostril. Suddenly, the weight of the shield became absolute. The adrenaline vanished, replaced by an exhaustion so profound it felt as though someone had replaced his blood with lead. The world spun violently. The edges of his vision darkened to black. Izuku dropped the shield. It hit the ground with a heavy, resonant thud that proved its immense density. A second later, Izuku's eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed over the metal surface, unconscious. The Clinic of Miracles. The sterile smell of rubbing alcohol and iodine permeated the air of Dr. Tsubasa's private clinic. Inko Midoriya sat in a stiff vinyl chair, her hands wringing a shredded tissue in her lap. Her eyes were red and puffy from crying. On the examination table sat Izuku. He was awake now, swinging his short legs, a small bandage taped over his nose. He looked pale, with dark bags under his eyes that shouldn't belong on a toddler's face, but he was quietly sipping a juice box. On the steel counter next to the doctor's computer sat the titanium shield. It looked entirely out of place in the medical room, a weapon of war in a place of healing. Dr. Tsubasa, a bald, rotund man with thick spectacles and a bushy mustache, was pacing the room. He held a clipboard, his eyes darting frantically over a series of printed charts and blood test results. He muttered to himself, occasionally stopping to stare at the shield, then at Izuku, and then back to the paperwork. Doctor? Inko finally spoke, her voice trembling. Please. Is my baby all right? When they called me from the park, they said he just collapsed. They said he made that. She pointed a shaky finger at the metal shield. Dr. Tsubasa stopped pacing. He took a deep breath, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. He looked at Inko with an expression that was a complex mix of professional detachment, absolute awe, and a hint of deep, underlying concern. Mrs. Midoriya, Dr. Tsubasa began, his voice gravelly. I have been studying quirks for 40 years. I have seen fire breathers, telekinetics, people who can alter their own cellular structure, and children who can bend light. But what your son has done today... He paused, gesturing toward the shield. This is not standard manifestation. Inko's breath hitched. Is it dangerous? All quirks have their drawbacks, but Izuku's is fundamentally rule-breaking, the doctor explained, pulling up an X-ray on his monitor. He tapped the screen, which showed a scan of Izuku's brain. The frontal lobe and parietal lobe showed unusually dense neural pathways, glowing bright white on the thermal imaging. Your son has a creation-type quirk. But it is vastly different from anything on record. Most creation quirks require a medium. For example, some individuals can convert their body fat or sweat into simple objects. But we ran a chemical analysis on that shield, Mrs. Midoriya. Dr. Tsubasa leaned forward. It is pure, military-grade titanium. It weighs 20 pounds. Izuku does not have the bodily mass, the minerals, or the lipids in his system to produce a fraction of an ounce of titanium, let alone a 20-pound slab. Inko looked at her son, who was now intently examining the straw of his juice box, seemingly oblivious to the gravity of the conversation. Then, how did he make it? Energy conversion, Tsubasa said, saying the words as if they were a holy text. E = mc². It is the fundamental law of physics that energy and mass are interchangeable. Most quirks ignore the laws of physics. Izuku's quirk weaponizes them. The doctor walked over to the shield and tapped it with a pen. Clink. From what our biometric readings tell us, Izuku's body acts as a biological forge. When his quirk activated, he didn't use materials from his body. He violently consumed his own physical stamina, his caloric energy, and, most terrifyingly, the ambient kinetic energy from young Bakugo's explosion. He absorbed that energy, calculated the atomic structure of titanium instantaneously in his subconscious, and manifested it into physical reality. Inko stared at the doctor, the words washing over her. He made it out of his own energy? Yes. And that is why he collapsed, bleeding from the nose, Dr. Tsubasa warned, his tone turning grave. The human brain is not a supercomputer. The sheer processing power required to visualize and bond the atomic structure of a complex alloy is astronomical. Combine that with the instant drainage of his bodily stamina to provide the mass, and it is a miracle the boy didn't slip into a permanent coma. The strain on his nervous system and metabolism is extreme. Inko rushed forward, wrapping her arms around Izuku, burying her face in his green hair. My poor baby. Izuku, promise mommy you'll be careful. Promise me you won't use it if it hurts you. Izuku blinked, lowering his juice box. He looked at his mother, then past her, staring at the shield on the counter. The exhaustion was still heavy in his bones, a dull ache throbbing behind his eyes. But as he looked at the metal, he didn't feel fear. He felt a profound, burning curiosity. I classify this quirk as a mutant-level anomaly, Dr. Tsubasa continued, writing a final note on his clipboard. I'm officially registering the quirk under the name Genesis. Mrs. Midoriya, your son holds one of the most powerful abilities ever recorded in medical history. He essentially has the power of a god in the body of a mortal child. He must be monitored carefully. If he attempts to create something too massive or too complex without understanding it, the backlash could kill him. Inko sobbed quietly, holding Izuku tighter. Izuku gently patted his mother's arm. Don't cry, Mom, he whispered softly. I'm okay. He looked back at the shield. The doctor had said he needed to understand what he was making. His subconscious had done it this time, fueled by adrenaline and terror. But what if he didn't have to rely on his subconscious? What if he knew exactly how things were put together? At 4 years old, a seed was planted in Izuku Midoriya's mind. A hero couldn't rely on luck. A hero needed to be smart. A hero needed to know how the world worked, down to the very last atom. The shifting of the tides. The return to the preschool was a quiet affair, but the atmosphere had irrevocably changed. Before the incident, Izuku had been a ghost, a punching bag, a follower in Katsuki Bakugo's fiery wake. He was Deku, the useless one. But children, despite their age, possess a primal instinct for power dynamics. They had all seen the blinding blue light. They had all seen the unbreakable metal shield. And most importantly, they had all seen Katsuki Bakugo knocked to the dirt. During recess a few days later, Izuku sat alone under a tree. He wasn't playing with All Might action figures today. Instead, spread across his lap was a massive, heavily illustrated children's encyclopedia of minerals and metals that Inko had bought him. His brow was furrowed in intense concentration, his small finger tracing the molecular diagrams of iron, carbon, and steel. A shadow fell over his book. Izuku looked up to see Katsuki standing over him. The blonde boy's expression was unreadable, a turbulent mix of his usual arrogance masking a deep, unsettling insecurity. His lackeys were nowhere to be seen. Katsuki had approached alone. Hey, Katsuki demanded, his voice lacking its usual explosive volume. Hi, Kaken, Izuku replied evenly, not shrinking back as he usually did. Katsuki stared at the encyclopedia. What are you reading? Nerd books? It's about metals, Izuku said, turning the book slightly so Katsuki could see. Dr. Tsubasa said my quirk uses energy to build things. But it hurts my head because I don't know how things are built. If I learn how they work, maybe it won't hurt so much. Katsuki's fists clenched at his sides. The mention of the quirk was a sore spot. You think you're better than me now, Deku? Because you made a stupid piece of metal? Izuku looked at Katsuki. In the past, Izuku would have flinched, apologized, and cowered. But the Genesis quirk had altered more than just Izuku's body. The sheer processing power his brain had unlocked gave him a new, terrifyingly calm clarity. He didn't see an insurmountable monster anymore. He saw a boy who produced nitroglycerin like sweat and ignited it. "No, Kaken. I don't think I'm better than you," Izuku said honestly, closing the heavy book. "Your quirk is amazing for fighting. It's fast and strong. My quirk just makes things." But, Izuku's green eyes locked onto Katsuki's red ones, the emerald irises catching the light. "If you try to hurt people again, I'll make another shield. Or a cage. Or whatever I have to." Katsuki's breath hitched. It wasn't a boast. It was a cold, calculated statement of fact. There was no wavering in Izuku's voice. "You're full of crap," Katsuki spat, though he didn't raise his palms. He took a step back. "A flashy trick doesn't make you a hero. I'm going to be the #1 hero. I'll surpass All Might, and I'll crush you if you get in my way. Then I'll just have to work harder," Izuku replied simply, reopening his book. Katsuki stood there for a moment, his pride warring with the memory of that immovable titanium wall. With a sharp tch, he turned and stalked away. From that day on, the bullying stopped. But it wasn't replaced by friendship. It was replaced by a tense, predatory rivalry. Katsuki no longer viewed Izuku as a pebble on the side of the road. He viewed him as a massive, towering obstacle that needed to be scaled. Katsuki trained harder, pushed his explosions to their absolute limits, driven by the lingering fear of the boy who could summon reality from thin air. And Izuku? Izuku dove into the depths of human knowledge. The architect's ascent, a montage of years. The years passed, and Izuku Midoriya evolved into something uniquely terrifying. At age 6, while other children were learning basic multiplication, Izuku was begging his mother for high school-level physics textbooks. His bedroom, once a shrine exclusively dedicated to the smiling symbol of peace, All Might, slowly began to transform. The posters remained, but they were soon joined by sprawling architectural blueprints, periodic tables, and anatomy charts pinned to the walls. At age 8, Izuku attempted his second conscious creation. Sitting in his backyard, cross-legged on the grass, he closed his eyes and visualized a simple object, a solid steel ball bearing. He slowed his breathing. He focused on his stamina, feeling the well of energy within his core. He visualized the carbon and iron atoms, imagining their bonds forming a perfect sphere. He channeled the energy down his arms, feeling the cold, draining sensation take hold. A flash of blue light illuminated the yard. When Izuku opened his eyes, a perfect, gleaming steel ball the size of an apple sat in his palms. His nose didn't bleed this time, though a sharp headache immediately pulsed behind his temples. He had done it. He had bypassed the subconscious panic and actively forged matter. By age 10, his hero analysis for the future notebooks underwent a radical shift. They were no longer just observations of heroes' moves and weaknesses. They became engineering manifestos. When he watched the hero Kamui Woods, Izuku didn't just note the hero's agility. He sketched designs for a grapple hook mechanism equipped with carbon nanotube cables, calculating the exact tensile strength required to swing from a building. When he watched Endeavor, he drafted blueprints for thermal-resistant armor plating, dissecting the chemical properties of aerogel and tungsten. To create, he had to understand. And to understand, he had to obsess. However, the Genesis quirk exacted a heavy toll on his daily life. The first issue was his metabolism. Because his quirk fundamentally converted his bodily energy into mass, Izuku required an absurd amount of calories just to maintain a normal weight. Inko found herself cooking meals fit for a sumo wrestler. Izuku would regularly consume 5 massive bowls of rice, heavily protein-dense meats, and nutrient-rich shakes every single day. Despite the massive caloric intake, he remained lean, his body burning off the energy to fuel the neural pathways of his brain. The second issue was sensory overload. As Izuku's brain developed to handle the instantaneous calculations required for Genesis, he found himself occasionally overwhelmed by the world around him. Sometimes, looking at a simple television remote would trigger an involuntary cascade of data in his mind. He would instantly perceive the plastic polymers, the copper wiring, the silicone buttons, and the lithium battery. To combat the intense migraines caused by this hyper-awareness, Izuku began wearing a pair of lightly tinted, custom-made glasses. They helped dim the visual input, giving his brain a rest. He became quieter, more withdrawn, constantly lost in thought. To the students at Aldera Junior High, he wasn't Deku the useless anymore. He was Midoriya the weirdo, the quiet, intense kid who stared at walls and muttered complex mathematical formulas under his breath. Middle school was a battleground of a different sort. Izuku was 14 years old, sitting in his final year at Aldera. The teacher was droning on about future career paths, eventually tossing the papers into the air and laughing about how everyone wanted to be a hero. The class erupted into displays of quirks, elongated fingers, small bursts of water, minor telekinesis. Hey, teach! Don't lump me in with these background characters. Katsuki Bakugo sat with his feet on his desk, leaning back with an arrogant smirk. He was taller now, muscular, radiating an aura of dangerous confidence. I'm the only one here going to UA High. I aced the mock tests. I'm gonna surpass All Might and become the top-ranking hero. The class murmured in awe, some annoyed, but none daring to challenge him. Oh, right, the teacher said, glancing at a clipboard. Midoriya, you're applying for UA too, aren't you? The classroom fell dead silent. Every head turned to the back row, right next to the window. Izuku sat quietly. He wore his school uniform neatly, his green hair still messy, the faint blue tint of his glasses obscuring the intensity of his emerald eyes. He didn't flinch under the weight of the class's stares. He merely adjusted his glasses with a single finger. Yes, Izuku said, his voice calm, smooth, and lacking any of the nervous stutter that defined his early childhood. I am. Katsuki's smirk vanished. He slammed his feet onto the floor, standing up abruptly. His hands sparked with warning pops of nitroglycerin. Deku, he growled, the nickname now a habit rather than an accurate insult. You think you can compete with me? With your nerd tricks? Izuku looked at Katsuki. He didn't see an angry teenager. He saw a biological combustion engine. Nitroglycerin-like sweat secreted from the palmar glands. Ignition triggered by sparks from sweat gland mutations. Blast radius approximately 3 meters at current rest state. Yield can be magnified by creating a contained pressure vacuum. I'm not competing with you, Bakugo, Izuku said evenly, picking up a pen and twirling it through his fingers. The entrance exam is a point-based system. We don't have to fight each other. My goal is to pass, same as you. Don't give me that logical crap, Katsuki yelled, slamming his hand onto Izuku's desk. An explosion went off, singing the wood and sending Izuku's notebook flying into the air. Before the notebook could hit the ground, Izuku moved. He didn't scramble or panic. He simply raised his left hand. A localized, blinding flash of blue energy erupted from his palm. The energy solidified instantly in midair. Thwack! The notebook landed perfectly onto a floating, completely transparent disk of hard light energy. It hovered there, defying gravity, acting as a temporary shelf. The entire class gasped. Even the teacher took a step back. Izuku calmly reached out, picked up his intact notebook from the hard light construct, and let his hand drop. The blue disk shattered into a million motes of light, dissolving back into nothingness. My quirk isn't a trick, Bakugo, Izuku said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a weight that demanded absolute silence. It's an arsenal, and I suggest you stop burning school property, or I'll be forced to put a fire blanket over your head. Katsuki's jaw tightened. His eyes burned with fury, but he didn't attack again. He knew, better than anyone in that room, the sheer, terrifying density of the things Midoriya could create. He clicked his tongue, turning back around and kicking his chair before sitting down heavily. Izuku sighed softly, rubbing his temples. The hardlight construct was a new trick he had been practicing. Pure, solidified photons held together by a temporary energy matrix. It was incredibly fast to cast, requiring less atomic bonding than metal, but it drained his stamina faster because it constantly bled energy. He opened his notebook, ignoring the stares of his classmates. He had 10 months until the UA entrance exam. 10 months to finalize his designs. 10 months to turn his body into a machine capable of handling the godlike power housed in his brain, the blueprint of a hero. The moon hung high over Muzurifu, casting pale light through the window of the Midoriya apartment. It was 2 a.m., but Izuku was wide awake. His bedroom looked like the workshop of a mad scientist. The floor was littered with crumpled sketches, textbooks on avionics and electrical engineering, and empty energy drink cans. A massive whiteboard covered one wall, filled edge to edge with complex calculus, aerodynamic models, and chemical equations. Izuku sat cross-legged in the center of the floor, wearing only a pair of sweatpants and a tight black tank top. His physique was a stark contrast to the frail boy he once was. Years of intensive physical training, running, weightlifting, and gymnastics, had packed lean, dense muscle onto his frame. He wasn't built like a bodybuilder. He was built like a martial artist, designed for speed, endurance, and extreme stamina retention. He took a deep breath, closing his eyes behind his blue-tinted glasses. Focus. Isolate the components. He raised his hands in front of him, palms facing inward. The familiar, icy sensation washed over his body as Genesis activated. His heart rate slowed, his breathing deepening as his body began burning massive amounts of calories, converting them into pure, raw energy. The space between his hands began to glow with a brilliant, pulsing azure light. Titanium aluminum alloy chassis. Quad-rotor brushless electric motors. Lithium-ion polymer battery cell. Infrared optical sensors. Gyroscopic stabilization board. Izuku wasn't just visualizing a drone. He was physically assembling it at the molecular level within the energy matrix. It was like coding a computer program, but the language was chemistry, and the output was reality. He felt the familiar, agonizing spike of pain behind his eyes, the processing cost. He gritted his teeth, pushing through the migraine. Compile. Forge. The blue light snapped out of existence. Dropping into Izuku's waiting hands was a sleek, matte black quadcopter drone. It was utterly silent, flawless in design, lacking any manufacturing seams or screw holes. It had been born perfectly whole. Izuku opened his eyes, wiping a small bead of sweat from his forehead. He placed the drone on the floor. Boot sequence, Izuku muttered. The drone's optical lens flared to life with a soft red glow. The four rotors spun up instantly, completely silent thanks to the frictionless magnetic bearings Izuku had designed in his head. The drone lifted off the floor, hovering perfectly stable at eye level. Izuku smiled, a genuine, tired smile. Perfect stabilization. The weight distribution is flawless. He reached out and tapped the drone. In an instant, his quirk reversed. The drone didn't break. It dissolved back into blue energy, flowing back into Izuku's body. He couldn't reclaim 100% of the energy he spent to create it. Entropy was still a law of the universe, after all, but he could reabsorb the raw materials to lessen the physical toll on his body. He fell back onto his bed, staring up at the ceiling. The UA entrance exam was tomorrow. He knew the format of the practical exam. It was a poorly kept secret on hero forums that UA used robotics for their physical tests to avoid liability with human combatants. Robots. Machines. Izuku chuckled softly. Pitting him against machines was like pitting a fish against the ocean. He didn't just understand machines, he birthed them. He knew their weak points, their wiring, their logic boards, but he also knew the danger of his own quirk. Dr. Tsubasa's warnings from 10 years ago still echoed in his mind. Genesis was a bottomless well of power, but the bucket used to draw from it, his brain and body, was mortal. If he created something too massive, too complex, in the heat of battle, his brain would fry. His stamina would hit absolute zero, and he would die of cellular exhaustion. He couldn't rely on creating massive cannons or giant mechs. That was inefficient. It was arrogant. To win, to truly become the #1 hero who saved people with a smile, he had to be smart. He had to be a surgeon with his creations. Minimal energy. Maximum impact. Tactical superiority. Izuku rolled over, glancing at the final blueprint pinned above his desk. It wasn't a weapon, it was a schematic for a set of form-fitting gauntlets and reinforced boots, designed to amplify kinetic energy and redirect momentum. I don't need a quirk that just hits hard, Izuku whispered to the empty room, his eyes burning with quiet, unyielding determination. I'll build the tools to hit exactly where it matters. He reached over and turned off the desk lamp, plunging the room into darkness. Tomorrow, he would walk through the gates of UA High School. Tomorrow, the world would see that true power wasn't just born from the blood, or gifted by the gods. True power was engineered, and Izuku Midoriya was the greatest architect the world had ever seen. 10 months before the UA entrance exam, the world was entirely made of numbers, bonds, and thermal exchanges. At least, that was how Izuku Midoriya perceived it. The walk home from Aldera Junior High was normally a mundane, 15-minute trek through the residential district of Muzurifu. For most students, it was a time to gossip, play mobile games, or complain about homework. For Izuku, it was a daily exercise in sensory management and mental discipline. He walked with his head down, his blue-tinted glasses shielding his eyes from the harsh afternoon glare. His right hand was buried in his pocket, clutching a small, heavy cube of tungsten he had created during lunch. He was rolling it between his fingers, actively maintaining its molecular structure through a low-level, continuous feed of his physical stamina. It was a background process, like keeping a computer tab open, designed to train his endurance. Tungsten, his mind hummed, almost involuntarily. Atomic number 74. Atomic mass 183.84. High density. Extremely high melting point. Requires a constant energetic lattice to prevent atomic decay when manifested via genesis. He sighed, feeling the dull, ever-present ache at the base of his skull. Maintaining the cube was burning roughly 30 calories a minute. He would need to eat a massive dinner tonight, maybe 3 steaks and a mountain of rice, just to break even. His route took him under a wide concrete overpass. It was a shortcut, usually dim and echoing with the distant hum of traffic from the highway above. Today, however, the shadows seemed thicker. The air was unnaturally damp, carrying a foul, sulfurous stench that reminded Izuku of backed-up sewage and rotting algae. Izuku stopped walking. His highly trained mind, constantly processing environmental data, instantly recognized an anomaly. Sudden drop in ambient light. Increased humidity. Toxic olfactory stimuli. Before he could turn around, the manhole cover a few yards behind him erupted in a geyser of foul, dark green sludge. A medium-sized meat suit. A gurgling, wet voice echoed through the tunnel. Just what I need to hide from that smiling freak. You'll do nicely, kid. Izuku turned just in time to see a tidal wave of living, sentient mud lunging at him. A pair of manic, bulbous eyes and a jagged mouth floated within the viscous mass. The sludge villain slammed into Izuku, knocking the tungsten cube from his pocket and driving him to his knees. Instantly, thick, foul-tasting sludge forced its way up Izuku's nose and into his mouth. The villain was trying to enter his lungs, trying to hijack his body from the inside out. Panic is the natural human response to suffocation. The brain registers a lack of oxygen, the amygdala fires, and the body thrashes wildly in a desperate bid for survival. But Izuku didn't panic. As the sludge tightened around his throat, Izuku's eyes widened behind his blue glasses, but his mind went utterly, terrifyingly still. Time dilated. Adrenaline flooded his system, but instead of fueling a chaotic struggle, his brain hijacked the hormone, channeling it directly into his quirk. Enemy analysis, his mind raced, operating at supercomputer speeds. Amorphous body. Liquid state. High viscosity. No solid skeletal structure. Vulnerable to extreme temperature fluctuations. Brute force will simply pass through the medium. The villain laughed, the sound bubbling wetly. Don't fight it, kid. It'll only hurt for about 45 seconds. Then you'll be my new. Izuku closed his eyes. He didn't reach up to claw at the sludge. Instead, he brought his hands together in front of his chest. He dug deep into the reserves of his body. He felt the heavy, caloric energy stored in his muscles, the kinetic energy of his racing heart, and the ambient thermal heat of the summer day. He seized it all, funneling it into his palms. Blueprint, industrial cryogenic sprayer, material base, high-tensile steel alloy cylinder, brass valving, Teflon-coated pneumatic nozzle, chemical payload, liquid nitrogen. Formula, N2. Temperature, -196 degrees Celsius. Pressurization required 300 psi. The calculation was agonizing. Imagining the metal was one thing, but forcefully condensing atmospheric nitrogen into a pressurized, Sub-zero liquid state within a sealed container required a terrifying amount of computational power and raw energy. Blood immediately began to trickle from Izuku's left nostril, mixing with the foul sludge on his face. A blinding, localized flash of azure light erupted from his hands, illuminating the dark underpass. What the? The sludge villain shrieked, recoiling slightly from the blinding glare. The light solidified. In Izuku's hands rested a heavy, frost-covered steel tank equipped with a wide-bore nozzle. It was freezing to the touch, heavy with pressurized liquid. Izuku didn't hesitate. He jammed the nozzle directly upward into the thickest part of the villain's mass, right beneath the floating eyes, and squeezed the heavy brass trigger. HSSSSSSSS. A blinding white cloud of hyper-freezing vapor erupted from the nozzle at terrifying velocity. The temperature in the underpass plummeted instantly. The villain's scream turned into a crackling, frozen gurgle. Liquid nitrogen expanded violently upon contact with the water-dense sludge. The villain's amorphous body turned a pale, sickly white as ice crystals aggressively tore through his cellular structure. In less than 3 seconds, the flowing mud was flash-frozen into a solid, brittle statue of dirty ice. The pressure around Izuku's throat vanished. The frozen sludge cracked and broke away from his face, shattering into icy chunks on the pavement. Izuku dropped the heavy sprayer, gasping violently for air. He fell to his hands and knees, coughing up foul-tasting water, his chest heaving. The migraine hit him like a physical blow, a spike of pure, white-hot agony driving through his temples. His vision blurred, swimming with dark spots. Texas. A booming voice echoed from the entrance of the tunnel. Izuku weakly turned his head. Standing at the mouth of the underpass was a colossus of a man. He was impossibly muscular, clad in a white t-shirt and cargo pants, with 2 distinctive tufts of blonde hair standing up like antennae. His blue eyes blazed with power, and a massive, confident smile was plastered across his face. Smash! The man threw a punch. He wasn't even close to the frozen villain, yet the sheer, ridiculous wind pressure generated by the strike hit the frozen sludge like a concussive bomb. The brittle, frozen villain shattered into 1,000 harmless pieces, scattering across the tunnel floor. "Fear not, young man!" All Might boomed, his voice vibrating in Izuku's chest. "For I am." All Might stopped mid-pose. He blinked, looking at the shattered ice, then down at the frost-covered industrial sprayer lying on the ground. Finally, his eyes landed on the small, green-haired boy kneeling on the concrete, bleeding from the nose but looking completely lucid. "Ah," All Might said, his booming voice dropping slightly in confusion. "It seems you had the situation entirely under control." Izuku wiped the blood from his nose with the back of his hand. He looked at the #1 hero in the world. He didn't scream like a fanboy. He didn't ask for an autograph. Instead, his analytical mind immediately went to work. All Might. Height, 220 centimeters. Estimated weight, 255 kilograms. Quirk, unknown power stockpiling or physical enhancement. But, his breathing is shallow. There's a slight tremor in his left leg. He's favoring his right side. "Why, you flash froze him," All Might noted, stepping closer, his massive boots crunching on the frozen sludge. He picked up the heavy steel tank. "This is incredible engineering. Where did you pull this from?" "I didn't see a support gear backpack. I made it," Izuku rasped, his throat still burning. "My quirk." "Genesis." All Might's eyebrows shot up. "Creation? Incredible. To produce such a complex and dangerous tool under extreme duress, you have the instincts of a pro, my boy." Suddenly, the #1 hero coughed. It wasn't a normal cough. It was a wet, violent hack. Izuku's eyes widened as a thick cloud of steam suddenly erupted from All Might's body. The massive, towering figure obscured by the smoke began to shrink rapidly, his muscles deflating like a popped balloon. When the steam cleared, the godlike hero was gone. In his place stood an emaciated, skeletal man with sunken eyes, wearing clothes that hung off him like a scarecrow. Blood trickled from his chin. The silence in the tunnel was deafening. Toshinori Yagi wiped the blood from his mouth, letting out a long, ragged sigh. He looked at the boy, expecting a scream of terror, a cry of disbelief, or a panic attack. Instead, Izuku slowly pushed himself to his feet. He adjusted his blue-tinted glasses, his emerald eyes scanning the skeletal man with terrifying intensity. Severe respiratory distress, Izuku muttered rapidly, walking closer. Loss of muscle mass. The steam, rapid cellular degradation caused by the cessation of your quirk's active state. You're bleeding from the mouth, which suggests severe internal trauma, likely the lungs or stomach. Given your career timeline, I'd estimate a catastrophic injury sustained approximately 5 years ago. Tashinori froze, his sunken blue eyes widening in absolute shock. How could you possibly know that? I don't just create things. I have to calculate them, Izuku explained quietly, stopping a few feet away. My quirk enhances my cognitive processing to handle molecular construction. I observe structures, and your biological structure, All Might, is collapsing. Tashinori stared at the boy. This wasn't a normal teenager. The intellect radiating from those green eyes was piercing, almost unnerving. You're right, Tashinori sighed, sitting heavily against the concrete wall of the underpass. He lifted his shirt, revealing a massive, spider-webbed scar that looked like an entire chunk of his respiratory system had been gouged out. 5 years ago, a villain called Toxic Chainsaw. Well, the public thinks it was him. But it was someone much worse. Half my respiratory organs were destroyed. I lost my stomach. I've become a hollow shell. I can only do hero work for about 3 hours a day now. Izuku stared at the scar. His mind involuntarily began calculating surgical solutions, organ cloning, advanced prosthetics. But he forced the thoughts down, wincing as another headache flared. He couldn't fix that. Not yet. Why are you telling me this? Izuku asked softly. Because you saw it. And because... Tashinori looked at the boy, then at the frozen villain, then at the heavy steel sprayer. Because I have never seen a child react to a lethal ambush with such cold, calculated efficiency. You didn't just survive, you neutralized a threat that slipped past me. What is your name, young man? Midoriya. Izuku Midoriya. Midoriya. Tashinori tasted the name. Tell me about your quirk. You said you made that tank. But I know of creation quirks. They require time, materials, and usually, they can't produce highly volatile chemicals on the fly. My quirk is called Genesis, Izuku explained, leaning against the wall, the exhaustion finally catching up to him. He slowly dispelled the tank. The steel and liquid nitrogen dissolved into blue light, flowing back into his body, bringing a small fraction of warmth back to his freezing skin. Tashinori watched the matter-to-energy conversion, utterly captivated. I use my physical stamina, caloric energy, and kinetic force to forge matter from nothing, Izuku continued. But it has a cost. If I don't perfectly understand the atomic structure of what I'm making, my brain misfires. And if I make something too big, it drains all the energy from my cells. I could literally die of exhaustion in an instant. Izuku looked down at his trembling hands. Everyone tells me I have a god-tier quirk. But it doesn't feel like a blessing. It feels like a curse. Every time I use it, it hurts. It drains me. But, Izuku clenched his fists, looking up at Tashinori, his eyes burning with an unyielding, green fire. I want to be a hero. I want to save people with a smile, just like you. I don't care how much it hurts my head or my body. I'm going to UA, and I'm going to the top. Tashinori felt a lump form in his throat. He saw himself in this boy. The reckless self-sacrifice. The obsession with saving others. But unlike Tashinori, who relied on overwhelming, brute force power, this boy relied on intellect, preparation, and excruciating discipline. Tashinori had been looking for a successor. He had considered giving one for all to this boy the moment he heard his declaration. But as he looked at Izuku, he realized something crucial. One for all was a quirk of physical stockpiling. It required a vessel capable of holding immense, explosive kinetic energy. Izuku's quirk, Genesis, consumed kinetic energy to create matter. If Tashinori gave Izuku one for all, the boy's subconscious mind might accidentally tap into that infinite well of power. He might try to create an aircraft carrier, or a skyscraper, or a nuclear bomb, and the resulting feedback loop of infinite energy meeting infinite creation would literally tear his atomic structure apart. It was too dangerous. But this boy didn't need one for all. He already had the strongest quirk Toshinori had ever seen. What the boy needed wasn't power. He needed a body that could survive it. Toshinori pushed himself up from the wall. He wiped the blood from his chin and stood tall, even in his skeletal form. Young Midoriya, Toshinori said, his voice stripped of the booming all-might persona, replaced by the earnest, solemn tone of a mentor. You have the heart of a true hero, and you possess a mind that could revolutionize the world. But your body is a fragile engine trying to house a star. Izuku looked up, his breath catching. I cannot give you my quirk, Toshinori said, stepping forward and placing a heavy, bony hand on Izuku's shoulder. But I can give you my experience. UA is 10 months away. If you try to pass their exams as you are now, your quirk will tear you apart. You need to expand your physical limits. You need to increase your caloric capacity, your pain tolerance, and your stamina pool to superhuman levels. You want to train me? Izuku whispered, his analytical mind stalling for the first time all day. I want to forge you, Toshinori corrected, a fierce smile breaking across his gaunt face. You build machines, Midoriya. Let me help you build the ultimate vessel. Will you accept my tutelage? Tears pricked the corners of Izuku's eyes, but he refused to let them fall. He stood up straight, ignoring the throbbing migraine, and bowed deeply. Yes, sir. I will give you everything I have. The Forge of Dagoba Beach, Month 1 began in Hell, or, more accurately, Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. It was a massive stretch of coastline that had been illegally used as a dumping ground for years. Mountains of rusted refrigerators, abandoned cars, broken washing machines, and twisted steel dominated the sand. Your goal, Toshinori announced on the first morning, bundled up in an oversized trench coat against the brisk ocean wind, is to clean this beach. Every single piece of trash. Izuku, dressed in his workout clothes, stared at the literal mountains of garbage. I can calculate the mass. There are thousands of tons of metal here. Even with 10 months. You misunderstand, young Midoriya. Toshinori laughed. You aren't just going to carry it. I want you to use your quirk. But you cannot create anything that directly destroys the trash. No lasers, no bombs. You must create the tools to move it. Pulleys, winches, compactors, vehicles. You will use your stamina to create the machines, and then use your physical muscles to operate them. You will drain your battery to zero every single day, and force it to grow. Izuku's eyes widened. It was brilliant. It was physical and mental torture combined into one perfectly sadistic training regimen. He started small. On the first day, he stood before a rusted pickup truck half buried in the sand. He closed his eyes, visualizing the mechanical advantage of a block and tackle. He channeled his energy. The familiar, agonizing drain hit him, followed by the flash of blue light. In his hands, a heavy-duty, carbon steel dual-pulley system appeared, complete with 500 feet of braided synthetic cable. He didn't just spawn it perfectly. He bled from his nose and immediately vomited into the sand from the intense caloric drain. Eat. Toshinori commanded, tossing Izuku a massive, protein-dense nutrition bar. Your body just burned 3,000 calories in 2 seconds. Replenish and operate. Gagging slightly, Izuku choked down the food, tied the cable to the truck, and spent the next 3 hours physically dragging the vehicle up the beach using the mechanical advantage of his created pulley. By the end of month 3, the dynamic had shifted drastically. The beach was slowly clearing. Izuku's body was changing. The lean muscle he had built in middle school was thickening, becoming dense and corded. His shoulders broadened. His metabolism had skyrocketed to a terrifying degree. He was eating upwards of 10,000 calories a day, his body constantly running like a furnace. He was no longer vomiting from simple creations. Toshinori sat on a cleared patch of sand, watching in awe as Izuku faced a massive pile of crushed shipping containers. Izuku didn't build a pulley this time. He took a deep breath, dropping into a wide stance. His eyes glowed a vibrant green beneath his tinted glasses. The blue aura of Genesis engulfed him, brighter and more intense than ever before. Schematic, industrial hydraulic press and baler. Power source, diesel-electric generator. Material, 50 tons of reinforced titanium framing, tungsten carbide crushing plates, high-pressure hydraulic fluid lines. Izuku screamed. It wasn't a battle cry. It was a scream of pure, agonizing mental exertion. Blood poured freely from both nostrils, and his eyes were bloodshot. The energy drain was so massive that the sand around him actually began to freeze, frost forming on the beach as he violently absorbed the ambient thermal energy of the environment to supplement his own stamina. Boom! A blinding flash of light engulfed the beach. When it faded, a massive, 2-story tall hydraulic crushing machine sat heavily on the sand, its diesel engine already rumbling to life. Izuku had perfectly synthesized the complex hydrocarbon chains of diesel fuel within the tank. Izuku collapsed to his knees, gasping for air, clutching his head as if it were splitting open. But he didn't pass out. He stayed conscious. Tashinori jogged over, handing the boy a towel for the blood. Midoriya, that was spectacular. But you pushed too hard. You're bordering on cellular exhaustion. I have to, Izuku panted, wiping his face. The Yuri exam, they'll have giant robots. 0-pointers, probably. A pulley won't work. I need to be able to manifest heavy ordnance and complex machinery instantly. I need my brain to get used to the pain. Tashinori sat beside him, looking up at the towering machine Izuku had pulled from his own mind and life force. You are too hard on yourself, Izuku. You rely so heavily on your intellect and your creations, but do not forget the vessel. A hero must fight, even when his tools are broken. You want me to fight? Izuku asked, looking at his scarred hands. I'm not a brawler like you, All Might. No. You are a tactician, Tashinori smiled. But a tactician who can throw a punch is a terrifying thing. Tomorrow, we incorporate martial arts into your routine. I will teach you how to redirect force, how to use your opponent's weight, and how to fight when your mind is too exhausted to create. The mind and the muscle. Months 4 through 7 were a blur of blood, sweat, and motor oil. Izuku's creations became more refined. He realized that creating massive objects was inefficient. Why create a giant hydraulic press when he could create a localized, micro-singularity gravity mine to crush the trash? Why build a bulldozer when he could create a swarm of automated, acid-spitting drones to dissolve the metal? He began optimizing. He spent his nights reading quantum physics and advanced chemistry. He spent his days sparring with All Might on the beach. Tashinori, even in his skeletal form, was a master of combat. He taught Izuku how to fight without relying on raw power. He taught him parries, joint locks, and how to strike nerve clusters. Izuku, in turn, incorporated his quirk into the martial arts. During a sparring session in month 6, Tashinori threw a wide, sweeping kick. Izuku didn't block it with his arms. In a microsecond, he manifested a thin, incredibly dense shield of kinetic absorbent vibranium alloy on his forearm. Tashinori's leg struck the metal, and the kinetic energy was entirely absorbed, deadening the blow. In the same fluid motion, Izuku dispelled the shield, created a pair of spring-loaded boots, and launched himself over Tashinori's head, creating a weighted bola midair and wrapping it around the hero's ankles. Tashinori hit the sand, completely immobilized. He looked up at the boy who had just outmaneuvered him. Izuku landed gracefully, the spring boots dissolving into blue light. He wasn't bleeding from his nose. His breathing was even. He had seamlessly integrated creation and combat into a terrifyingly fluid dance. You! Tashinori laughed, a booming, genuine sound that echoed off the ocean. Are going to give Aizawa a massive headache. Who? Izuku asked, tilting his head. Nobody, Tashinori smirked. Just an old friend. The eve of the exam, month 10. The final day, Tashinori stood on the sea wall overlooking Dagoba Beach. The sun was rising, casting a golden hue over the water. There was no trash. The entire coastline, stretching for miles, was pristine, white sand. The rusted trucks, the mountains of refrigerators, the twisted metal, all of it was gone, crushed, dissolved, or hauled away by machines born from a single teenager's mind. Standing at the edge of the water was Izuku Midoriya. He was shirtless, his body a testament to 10 months of unrelenting hell. He was heavily muscled, his abs sharply defined, his arms roped with veins that spoke of immense cardiovascular capacity. Scars littered his knuckles from hours of striking rusted steel. He stood with his eyes closed, listening to the waves. You've done it, young Midoriya, Toshinori called out, walking down the steps onto the clean sand. You've exceeded every expectation I had. Your stamina reserves are astronomical. Your pain tolerance is superhuman. Izuku turned around. He looked older than 14. There was a quiet, heavy maturity in his eyes. It's not just the stamina, all might, Izuku said softly. He raised his right hand. He didn't scream. He didn't tense up. He didn't even bleed. With a casual flick of his wrist, a blinding blue light engulfed the beach. The air pressure dropped violently. When the light faded, a massive, 20-foot-long railgun rested on the sand beside Izuku. It was a masterpiece of futuristic engineering, humming with electromagnetic potential, sleek and deadly. It was a weapon that would take a team of scientists a decade to build. Izuku had created it in less than a second, simply because he had the biological fuel to do so. He tapped the side of the massive weapon, and it dissolved back into blue energy, flowing into him. I don't feel the pain anymore, Izuku said, adjusting his tinted glasses. The math, the atomic bonds, it's like breathing now. I know how the world is put together. Toshinori looked at his protege. He felt a profound sense of pride, mixed with a healthy dose of awe. The UE entrance exam is in 3 hours, Toshinori said, checking his watch. Go home. Shower. Put on your uniform. Today, you show the world that true power isn't given. It is forged. Izuku nodded. He grabbed his shirt and threw it on, turning to face the city. The fear that had dominated his childhood was gone. The boy who cowered from explosions was dead, left behind in the dirt of a playground 10 years ago. In his place stood an architect of reality. A boy who could pull the future from his mind and forge it into the present. Izuku Midoriya walked away from the beach, his mind already calculating the structural weaknesses of UA's theoretical robotics. He was ready. The gates of UA High School did not look like the entrance to a high school. They looked like the threshold of a military fortress, towering arches of glass and steel piercing the crisp morning sky. Izuku Midoriya stood at the bottom of the long brick pathway leading to the main building. Around him, hundreds of teenagers swarmed like nervous ants, clutching their bags, murmuring to themselves, psyching themselves up. The air was thick with anxiety and the faint, crackling ozone of nervously suppressed quirks. Izuku was perfectly calm. He wore his standard black Aldera Junior High uniform, but it fit him differently now. The fabric pulled taut across his broad shoulders and dense chest, concealing the terrifying physique he had carved out of the sands of Dagoba Beach. His blue-tinted glasses rested comfortably on his nose, dimming the morning sun and easing the constant stream of data his brain processed. Yui Main Building. Izuku's mind hummed passively, a background process he had long stopped trying to quiet. Reinforced plasteel windows. Load-bearing titanium alloy pillars. The structural integrity is designed to withstand a magnitude 8.5 earthquake, or a localized kinetic strike of roughly 50,000 joules. He took a breath, letting the calculations fade into the back of his mind. He took a step forward. Out of my way, Deku! A heavy shoulder slammed into Izuku's back. For a normal teenager, the impact would have sent them sprawling onto the pavement. Izuku didn't even sway. His center of gravity was flawless. He simply turned his head, watching Katsuki Bakugo stomp past him. Bakugo paused, glancing over his shoulder. He looked at Izuku's unmoved posture, his eyes narrowing in a mix of irritation and that lingering, deep-seated wariness. Don't think just because you bulked up you're suddenly hot shit, Bakugo sneered, small sparks popping off his palms. You're still a pebble. I'm going to set the high score today, and you're going to be eating my dust. Good morning, Bakugo, Izuku replied evenly, adjusting his glasses. Good luck in the exam. Bakugo's face twisted in rage at the polite, utterly unbothered response. He clicked his tongue and stormed off toward the auditorium. Izuku watched him go, then resumed his walk. He had only taken 3 steps when he heard a sharp gasp and the sound of a shoe scraping awkwardly against the brick. Whoa! Izuku turned. A girl with a brown bob and permanent blush stickers on her cheeks had tripped over her own feet. She was falling face first toward the hard brick path. Izuku's reaction time was no longer human. 10 months of sparring with the #1 hero had rewired his nervous system. But he didn't reach out to catch her. That would require crossing 6 feet of space in less than a second, possible, but inefficient. Instead, he flicked his wrist. A tiny, localized spark of blinding blue light flared right beneath the girl's chest. Instantly, a completely transparent, glowing blue disk of hard light energy materialized a millimeter above the brick. The girl landed on it face first, but instead of the sickening crunch of bone on stone, she bounced slightly, as if she had fallen onto a tightly pulled trampoline. Eh? The girl blinked, floating parallel to the ground, suspended by the glowing blue disk. Izuku walked over casually and offered his hand. Careful. The bricks here are slightly uneven. A localized depression of about half an inch on that specific paver. The girl stared at him, then at the glowing disk beneath her. As she took his hand and stood up, Izuku dropped his quirk. The disk shattered into a million motes of harmless blue light, dissipating into the morning air. Whoa! The girl breathed, her brown eyes wide with absolute wonder. Did you do that? That was so cool. It looked like magic. Thank you so much. It's not magic. It's just compressed photons trapped in a temporary kinetic matrix, Izuku replied automatically, his mind analyzing her. Small pads on her fingertips. Likely an emitter or contact-based quirk. Tactile application. I'm Midoriya Izuku. I'm Uraraka Achiko. She smiled brightly, the nervous energy completely vanishing from her posture. Your quirk is amazing. Is it like light manipulation? Something like that, Izuku smiled softly. It was the first time in his life a peer of his own age had looked at his quirk with genuine awe instead of fear or confusion. We should get inside. The orientation is about to start. Right. Let's do our best, Midoriya. Uraraka pumped her fist into the air before jogging toward the doors. Izuku felt a strange warmth in his chest. Friends, he thought. Maybe Yui won't be so bad after all. The briefing. The auditorium was massive, packed with thousands of hopeful applicants. Izuku sat in his assigned seat, perfectly straight, his eyes locked on the stage. Bakugo, unfortunately, was seated directly to his right. Welcome to my live show, everybody. The voice hero. Present Mike screamed into the microphone, his quirk amplifying his voice to deafening levels. Say hey. Silence echoed across the room. Tough crowd. Mike laughed it off. All right, examinees. Let's get right into the meat of the practical exam. You'll be conducting 10-minute mock urban battles. You can bring whatever you want with you. After the presentation, you'll head to your assigned battle centers. Izuku looked down at his test card. Battle Center B. He glanced at Bakugo's card. Battle Center A. They're splitting up students from the same middle school, Izuku muttered. To prevent cooperation. They want to observe raw, individual tactical response. Shut up, Deku. Stop your damn mumbling, Bakugo growled, though he was staring intently at the screen behind Mike. The screen illuminated, showing digital silhouettes of 3 different robots. There are 3 types of faux villains in every battle center. Mike explained, pointing dramatically. They are worth 1 point, 2 points, and 3 points. Use your quirks to dispatch them and earn points. But remember, anti-hero actions like attacking other examinees are strictly prohibited. Suddenly, a tall, severe-looking boy with glasses and meticulously combed hair stood up in the front row, his hand raised as rigid as a board. Excuse me, sir. I have a question. The boy shouted, a spotlight snapping onto him. On the printout, there are clearly 4 types of villains. If this is a misprint, then Yui, the premier hero academy in Japan, should be ashamed of this foolish mistake. We are here to be molded into exemplary heroes. The boy then spun around, pointing a stiff, accusatory finger directly at Izuku. And you, with the tinted glasses. You've been muttering calculations under your breath this entire time. It's incredibly distracting. If you are not taking this seriously, then leave immediately. Thousands of eyes snapped to Izuku. Bakugo smirked, waiting for Izuku to stutter, to shrink, to apologize. Izuku didn't flinch. He didn't break eye contact with the tall boy. He simply tapped the side of his glasses and spoke, his voice completely level but carrying a crisp, undeniable authority. My apologies if my auditory processing disturbed you, Izuku said calmly. However, if you are looking at the same printout I am, you would notice that the fourth villain lacks a point value. Contextually, one can deduce it is an environmental hazard rather than a scoring objective. Perhaps you should focus on your own tactical assessment rather than policing the behavior of your competitors before the exam has even begun. The entire auditorium went dead silent. The tall boy with glasses flushed bright red. He opened his mouth, closed it, bowed rigidly at a 90-degree angle, and barked, "I understand. Thank you for the observation." Before sitting down heavily, Bakugo stared at Izuku, his jaw tight. The nerd didn't just stand his ground. He had effortlessly dismantled the guy's argument with cold logic. President Mike blinked, clearing his throat. Yes. Thank you, examinee 7111. The fourth villain is worth 0 points. It's an obstacle. A massive gimmick that will go on a rampage. My advice? Just run away from it. The presentation concluded shortly after. Izuku stood up, cracking his neck. Battle Center B, he thought, his blood beginning to pump, the heavy, dense caloric energy in his body waiting to be unleashed. Time to go to work. The starting line. Battle Center B was not a simulation room. It was an actual, fully scaled fake city, complete with skyscrapers, alleyways, and asphalt roads, enclosed by massive concrete walls. Izuku stood near the front of the massive crowd of teenagers waiting before the towering steel gates. Everyone around him was stretching, sweating, adjusting their support gear. Some had customized armor, others had complex weapons strapped to their backs. Izuku wore nothing but a standard UA physical education tracksuit. No belt. No gloves. No weapons. The tall boy with glasses from the auditorium, Tenya Ida, Izuku had deduced from his uniform, was lecturing Uraraka near the back of the crowd. Ida looked over at Izuku, his eyes narrowing critically. He has absolutely no gear, Ida thought, adjusting his own glasses. And he doesn't seem to possess a physical mutation quirk. Is he relying purely on martial arts against robots? Foolish. Izuku tuned out the whispers. He widened his stance, closing his eyes. He didn't need to warm up his muscles. He needed to warm up his mind. He brought his hands up, resting them just above his hips. The air around him suddenly dropped in temperature. It was subtle at first, but the examinees standing closest to him actually shivered, stepping back as a thin layer of frost began to form on the asphalt beneath Izuku's sneakers. Genesis engine, online. He felt the massive reserves of calories he had consumed that morning, the 3 dozen eggs, the mountain of rice, the high-density protein shakes, begin to burn. It was a sensation of deep, internal heat contrasting with the freezing, kinetic drain of his external environment. Right, let's start. President Mick's voice boomed from speakers hidden along the wall. The crowd blinked in confusion. There was no countdown. What's the matter? There are no countdowns in real battles. Run, run, run! Before the other students could even process the command, a blinding flash of azure blue light erupted at the front of the pack. The crowd recoiled, throwing their hands up to shield their eyes. When the light snapped out of existence a microsecond later, Izuku Midoriya was no longer wearing just a tracksuit. Encasing his legs from the knee down were a pair of sleek, matte black, mechanized boots. They were constructed of a lightweight titanium carbon weave, equipped with pneumatic shock absorbers and compressed air exhaust ports at the heels. Covering his hands and forearms were twin gauntlets, glowing with a soft, pulsing blue light at the palms. They looked like something pulled straight from a futuristic sci-fi movie, repulsor engines designed for kinetic redirection. Izuku didn't run. He slammed his heel into the ground. Hiss boom! The pneumatic boosters in his created boots discharged, launching him forward with the speed of a fired cannonball. He cleared the massive gates and vanished into the fake city before the other examinees had even taken their first step. He just materialized gear out of thin air. Someone screamed in the crowd. Don't just stand there. After him! Ida yelled, his own engine calves roaring to life as he sprinted forward. The observation room. Deep within the central tower of UA, a massive wall of monitors illuminated a darkened room. Sitting in plush chairs were the elite staff of the academy. Midnight, the R-rated hero, lounged with a cup of coffee. Cementos watched the structural integrity of the arenas. Eraserhead, Aizawa Shoyuta, lay on the floor in a bright yellow sleeping bag, his bloodshot eyes peering out. At the center of the console sat Nedzu, the principal of UA, a creature that was a mix of a mouse, a bear, and a dog, sipping high-end Earl Grey tea. Next to him sat Power Loader, the head of the support department, frantically monitoring the telemetry data of the robots. And standing in the shadows at the back of the room, looking significantly healthier than he had 10 months ago, was Tashinori Yagi. All might. Fascinating crop of students this year, Nedzu chirped, watching the screens. The explosive boy in Center A is racking up points through pure, destructive instinct, and the boy with the engine legs in Center B is moving with excellent efficiency. Hey, wait a minute, Power Loader suddenly leaned forward, his hands flying across his keyboard. He zoomed in on a specific camera feed in Battle Center B. On the screen, a blur of black and blue light was tearing through a sector completely alone. Examinee 7111. Midoriya Izuku, Power Loader read the file, his eyes widening. Nedzu, who authorized this kid to bring heavy support ordnance into the practical exam? His file says he brought 0 items. Aizawa shifted in his sleeping bag, his eyes narrowing at the screen. If he snuck weapons in, he's disqualified. He didn't sneak them in. All Might spoke from the shadows, a proud, massive grin plastered across his gaunt face. Watch him closely, Eraserhead. He's not using gear he bought. He's using his quirk. On the monitor, Izuku was surrounded by 3 two-pointer robots. He's trapped, Midnight observed, leaning forward. He doesn't have the firepower to take 3 at once with just those boots. On the screen, Izuku didn't panic. He raised his right arm. A violent flash of blue light illuminated the alleyway. Suddenly, a heavy, intricate cylinder made of copper coils and high-capacity capacitors rested in his palm. It was an EMP, electromagnetic pulse, grenade. He tossed it casually into the center of the robots. Bzzzt crack. A wave of invisible, high-frequency electromagnetic interference washed over the alley. The 3 two-pointers instantly sparked, their optical sensors shorting out as their internal motherboards were completely fried by the pulse. They collapsed to the ground, dead. Izuku didn't even look back. He sprinted past them, tapping the EMP casing on the ground as he ran, instantly dissolving it back into blue energy to reclaim the raw materials. Power Loader dropped his coffee mug. It shattered on the floor. Did he just manufacture a military-grade localized EMP grenade in 0.3 seconds? Power Loader screamed, ripping his helmet off. The micro-soldering alone. The capacitance calculations required to not fry his own gauntlets. It's impossible. The human brain can't process that. His can, Nedzu said, his small black eyes glinting with a terrifying, manic intellect. His quirk is registered as Genesis. The ability to convert his own stamina and kinetic energy directly into physical matter. But to do so, he must perfectly understand the atomic and mechanical structure of his creations. Aizawa sat up entirely, unzipping his sleeping bag. He stared at the screen, watching Izuku bounce off a wall using his pneumatic boots, instantly manifesting a heavy-duty titanium riot shield to block a missile from a 3-pointer, before turning the shield into a massive, heavy-bore kinetic shotgun and blowing the robot's head off. He's not just a powerhouse, Aizawa muttered, a rare smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. He's adapting his creations to the exact structural weaknesses of the enemies. He's using minimal energy for maximum output. He's fighting like a pro who's been doing this for 20 years. He's an engineer who fights like a gladiator, Power Loader breathed, completely mesmerized. If he doesn't get into the hero course, I'm kidnapping him for the support department. I think, Nedzu smiled, taking a delicate sip of his tea, he is destined for much greater things than the lab. Let us see how he handles true adversity. Nedzu reached out and pressed a large, glowing red button on his console. The urban war zone, 45 points. Izuku landed heavily on the roof of a 3-story building, his pneumatic boots hissing as they vented hot air. He took a deep breath, pressing 2 fingers to his temple. The migraine was starting. It wasn't unbearable yet, but he had created over 20 different complex items in the last 6 minutes. EMPs, frictionless gels, sonic emitters, kinetic shotguns, carbon fiber capture nets. His caloric reserves were dipping into the yellow zone. His body temperature was running dangerously hot, his metabolism working in absolute overdrive to fuel his brain. I need roughly 60 points for a guaranteed passing grade, Izuku calculated, his eyes scanning the chaotic streets below. I've eliminated the primary clusters in Sector 4. I should move to Sector. The ground shook. It wasn't a tremor. It was a localized, catastrophic earthquake. Izuku stumbled on the roof, his gyroscopic boots auto-adjusting to keep him upright. He looked toward the center of the fake city. The buildings were crumbling. A massive shadow eclipsed the morning sun, rising from the center of the avenue, crushing a 5-story office building under its treads as if it were made of cardboard, was the zero-pointer. It was a monstrosity. It was easily the size of a skyscraper, a colossal, olive-green behemoth of reinforced steel and hydraulic terror. Its singular, glowing red eye swept the street, and a deafening, mechanical roar echoed across the battle center. Less than 2 minutes remaining. President Mick's voice echoed. Down on the street, utter panic erupted. The examinees, who had been fiercely competing just moments before, broke into a dead sprint in the opposite direction. Run! Ida yelled, his engines flaring as he retreated. It's the obstacle. There's no point in fighting it. Izuku stood on the roof, staring up at the machine, his brain involuntarily activated. Foe villain, zero-pointer. Height, approximately 300 feet. Weight, estimated 4,000 tons. Armor composition, high-density tungsten steel alloy. Weaknesses, joint articulation, specifically the primary drive shafts located at the base of the tread assembly. Power core likely located centrally behind the thoracic plating. Lethal threat. Recommend immediate retreat. Izuku turned to jump away. He had enough points. There was no logical reason to engage. I'll please help. Izuku froze. His highly trained auditory processing picked up a sound beneath the crunching of concrete and the screaming of students. He snapped his head back, zooming in with his blue-tinted glasses. At the base of the zero-pointer's path of destruction, pinned under a massive slab of rubble from a destroyed building, was Uraraka. She was reaching out, her leg trapped, watching in sheer terror as the colossal tread of the robot slowly advanced toward her. Izuku didn't think. He didn't calculate the points. He didn't calculate his passing grade. He only knew one thing: a hero saves people. Genesis engine, Izuku whispered, his voice dangerously low. Overdrive. Izuku threw himself off the roof. Hiss boom. He fired his boots at maximum output, launching himself across the sky, completely bypassing the retreating students. What is he doing? Ida screamed, skidding to a halt and looking back. He'll be killed. Izuku landed gracefully on a pile of rubble 50 feet in front of Uraraka, placing himself directly between her and the towering, 4,000-ton machine. Midoriya? Uraraka gasped, tears streaming down her face. Run, it's too big. Izuku didn't look back at her. He looked up at the behemoth. I cannot destroy it with brute force. I do not have the mass. If I create a weapon big enough to blow it up, the caloric drain will stop my heart. I must bypass its mass. I must manipulate physics. Izuku crossed his arms over his chest, taking a deep, shuddering breath. He closed his eyes. He pictured his stamina, a roaring, fiery furnace within his core. He visualized it pouring out of his cells, burning away the fat, the muscle energy, the glycogen. He reached out into the environment, violently absorbing the ambient kinetic energy of the rumbling earth and the thermal heat of the sun. The air around Izuku didn't just drop in temperature, it flashed into a localized blizzard. Ice rapidly crystallized across the rubble, spreading outward from his boots. Schematic 1. Localized anti-gravity mine. Function: disruption of graviton particles to nullify the target's mass within a 50-meter radius. Schematic 2. Armor-piercing kinetic penetrator, bunker buster. Function: focused, hypervelocity tungsten rod propelled by a shaped charge explosive. No explosive yield on impact. Pure kinetic piercing to destroy the internal power core. Simultaneous creation required. Processing load critical. Izuku opened his eyes. They were glowing a blinding, incandescent green, radiating pure Quirk energy. A thick stream of crimson blood poured from his nose, and the capillaries in his scarab burst, turning the whites of his eyes red. The migraine felt like a physical axe splitting his skull in two. Forge! Izuku roared, throwing his hands forward. The blue light that erupted wasn't a flash. It was a pillar. It shot up into the sky like a beacon, so bright that the cameras in the observation room instantly whited out. From the light, two objects materialized. The first was a small, disc-shaped device that slammed into the ground directly beneath the zero-pointer's forward treads. It activated instantly. A hum vibrated through the air, vibrating at a frequency so low it made Uraraka's teeth ache. Suddenly, the deafening crunch of the zero-pointer's advance stopped. The 4,000-ton machine, defying all laws of nature, began to slowly, terrifyingly float upward. The anti-gravity mine had completely severed its connection to the Earth's pull. The colossal robot was now completely weightless, suspended in the air, its treads spinning uselessly. He lifted it? Ida whispered from down the street, falling to his knees in absolute disbelief. But Izuku wasn't done. Resting heavily on his right shoulder was the second creation. It was a massive, 6-foot-long, shoulder-fired cannon. It looked brutal, functional, and terrifyingly heavy. Izuku didn't bother aiming. With the robot suspended in midair, its thoracic plating was completely exposed. Izuku's arms shook violently under the sheer weight of the weapon. His vision was going completely dark, the edges of his consciousness fraying. "Eat this," Izuku snarled, blood dripping off his chin. He pulled the trigger. There was no fiery explosion. There was only the sound of a whip cracking, magnified 10,000 times. Crack THOM. A solid rod of hyperdense tungsten, propelled by a shaped charge within the cannon, fired out of the barrel at Mach 5. The recoil was so immense it shattered the concrete beneath Izuku's boots, driving him to one knee. The tungsten rod crossed the distance in a fraction of a millisecond. It hit the dead center of the zero-pointer's chest plating. Because the robot was currently weightless, it had no anchoring force to resist the kinetic impact. The penetrator tore through 3 feet of tungsten steel armor like it was wet tissue paper, plunging straight into the robot's internal power core. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a line of blinding, pure white energy erupted from the hole in the robot's chest. The internal core went critical. Kablam! The explosion tore the zero-pointer apart from the inside out. Because the robot was suspended in the air by the anti-gravity mine, the shockwave rippled outward above the buildings, sparing the examinees on the ground from the deadly shrapnel. The sky rained burning metal and oil. Izuku watched the destruction for exactly 1 second. He immediately reversed his quirk, absorbing the heavy cannon back into his body to reclaim whatever scraps of energy he could. But it wasn't enough. The mental toll of calculating an anti-gravity field and a hypersonic projectile simultaneously was catastrophic. His brain essentially hit a biological kill switch to protect itself from burning out. "Time is up!" President Mike screamed. Izuku smiled weakly. He turned to look at Uraraka. "The rubble, the gravity mine will catch it," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Then, his eyes rolled back, and he collapsed face first into the dirt, entirely unresponsive. The aftermath. The silence in the observation room was so profound you could hear a pin drop. Every single pro-hero was standing. Aizawa's jaw was visibly slack. Power Loader was gripping his console so hard his knuckles were white. "Did he?" Midnight started, her voice trembling. "Did he just invent anti-gravity technology, and a hypersonic railgun, in the span of 3 seconds, to defeat a 4,000-ton obstacle?" "He didn't just defeat it," Aizawa corrected, his voice raspy. "He controlled the environment. He neutralized its mass to prevent collateral damage, then executed a precision strike to its weak point. He operated with the tactical perfection of a number 1 hero." All Might stood in the back, tears streaming down his gaunt face, completely unashamed. "You did it, my boy. You showed them all." He passed out, Nedza noted, his paw hovering over the microphone. "Recovery girl, please report to Battle Center B immediately. We have an examinee who has suffered severe quirk exhaustion." Down in the battle center, the dust settled. Uraraka had managed to wriggle her leg free now that the rubble had been caught in the fading anti-gravity field. She limped over to Izuku's prone form. "Midoriya!" she cried, dropping to her knees and gently turning him over. His face was pale, smeared with blood from his nose and dirt. His breathing was incredibly shallow. The other students began to cautiously gather around. Ida pushed his way to the front, staring at the unconscious boy, then up at the smoldering, decapitated remains of the zero-pointer. He knew the exam was over, Ida muttered, adjusting his glasses, a look of profound shame washing over his face. He knew that thing was worth 0 points, but he sacrificed his body, his score, and his safety just to save her. He is the only one among us who truly understands what it means to be a hero. An old woman in a lab coat, using a large syringe as a cane, hobbled through the crowd. Out of the way, out of the way. Give the boy some air. Recovery girl knelt beside Izuku. She assessed his vitals, her brow furrowing. Severe caloric depletion. Neurological strain. His body is essentially cannibalizing itself to keep his brain functioning. Incredible fortitude, but utterly reckless. She puckered her lips and kissed Izuku's forehead. Her quirk, which accelerated the body's natural healing process by using the patient's stamina, usually worked wonders. But Izuku didn't wake up. His stamina was literally at absolute 0. We need a stretcher, recovery girl commanded, looking up at the staff arriving. Get him to N4 drip immediately. We need to pump him full of glucose and lipids. As they loaded Izuku onto the stretcher, Uraraka watched, clutching her chest. She had come to this exam to get points, to secure a future for her family. But looking at the boy who had ripped the laws of physics apart just to save her life, she realized how small her perspective had been. The architect's reward. 1 week later, Izuku sat at his desk in his bedroom. He had slept for 3 entire days after the exam, waking up to a frantic mother and an N4 bag of nutrients attached to his arm in the UA infirmary. He was fully healed now, though his appetite had been monstrous all week to replenish his reserves. He was currently sketching a modification for his pneumatic boots, adding a gyroscopic stabilizer to the ankle joint, when his mother, Inko, burst into his room. She wasn't crying, which was a nice change of pace. She was holding a thick, metal-sealed envelope with the UA wax stamp on it. Izuku! It's here! She gasped, handing it to him. Izuku took the envelope. It was heavy. He could feel a small, disc-shaped object inside. He placed it on his desk, slit the top open, and a small metal projector slid out. It hit the desk, whirred to life, and projected a massive, high-definition holographic screen into the air. I am here as a projection. Izuku jumped slightly as All Might's booming voice filled his room. The hero was in his muscular form, wearing a bright yellow suit. Young Midoriya. Or should I say, young architect? All Might beamed, pointing directly at the camera. You have done something truly extraordinary. The written exam? You scored a perfect 100%, a feat matched by very few. Izuku held his breath. The written exam was easy. The practical was what worried him. He hadn't counted his points before he passed out. In the practical exam, you displayed terrifying ingenuity. You scored 55 villain points before the zero-pointer appeared. That alone would have been enough to secure a passing grade. The screen shifted, showing a leaderboard. Izuku's name was listed near the top. Bakugo Katsuki was listed above him, with 77 villain points. However, All Might's voice grew softer, more serious. A hero course that only rewards destruction is fundamentally flawed. How could we ignore a student who throws away his own safety, who pushes his very biology to the brink of death, to save a fellow examinee? The screen played the footage. It showed Izuku launching himself across the city. It showed the blinding flash of blue light. It showed the impossible, a 4,000-ton machine floating in the air, pierced by a hypervelocity railgun. Rescue points. All Might boomed. A hidden metric. Evaluated by a panel of judges. And your actions, young Midoriya, earned you a score that hasn't been seen in years. The leaderboard shifted. Izuku Midoriya. Villain points 55. Rescue points 60. Total 115 points. The name skyrocketed past Katsuki Bakugo's, locking into the absolute #1 spot. You passed, Izuku, All Might said, his smile softening into genuine, profound pride. Welcome to your hero academia. The hologram clicked off. Izuku sat in his chair, staring at the empty space where the leaderboard had been. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He simply reached down to his desk, picked up a pencil, and flipped his notebook to a fresh, blank page. UA High School, he wrote at the top of the page. first year, he had built his foundation. He had forged his body. He had unlocked the arsenal within his mind. Now the real work began.